Hello and welcome to the StopDevaluation podcast. I'm your host and founder of the StopDevaluation movement, Melody Hilton. The heart of this movement is to see the value in all of humanity and live courageous lifestyles of using our power for good instead of harm. We can affect change by choosing validation over judgment, and I hope you'll take your place and make a positive impact in this world. Welcome, everyone, to the StopDevaluation movement Culture of Validation interview with Rhonda Lynn. Thank you so much, Rhonda, for being here.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Well, Rhonda, you're a licensed therapist, correct?
I am, yes.
I know you have skills, but you also have the passion to help people heal from past trauma. And I'm just so honored that you're willing to partner with the StopDevaluation movement to bring your expertise and your wisdom to the table.
I'm honored to be a part.
I'd like to bring some solutions to the table for individuals who have been consumed in all the fears from the pandemic and racial tensions and riots and all this fear-generating news. So I want our listeners to have tools to rise above those fears, obtain peace, emotional health, and really have hope for the future. So before we get into that, I'd love to hear about your story. Have you experienced any form of devaluation, dehumanization, or racism?
Unfortunately, I wish I could say no to that. Just a little bit about my story. My mother experienced a very intense form of racism.
Yeah.
She experienced racism back in the days where the Ku Klux Klan would burn, crosses in her yard. And so because of that, she really, really set out to make sure that she raised my brother and I to never believe that we were less than.
Yes.
And so in doing that, what she would do is she would make sure that we would go to multicultural things as children. She would make sure that events that maybe, only a certain race of people would go to, Sir Lewis and I would include ourselves in that. And so as young kids, we grew up really, really with a multicultural perspective. However, she always made sure to teach us about our culture as Africans. She made sure to kind of instill that pride in us, and she did it very young. And I think that it was very strategic that she did it very young because she knew that at some point the world was going to attempt to take away everything that she taught us. And so a little bit about my story is, of course, we were always in multicultural circles, and we were always taught to be proud of who we were and proud of our history and our heritage, but that didn't block me nor my brother from racism. I can remember my very first experience with racism. I was in elementary school, and there was a state writing competition. Even at a very young age, I was very confident about my ability to write. And so with the writing competition, one of the prizes was that you would be able to choose one of your friends to go with you to the state competition if you won, and that you guys would go out to this nice restaurant and, like all of these things. So pretty much they treated you like a queen for a day if you were to win.
Aww.
So I just knew that I was going to win it. I practiced, I wrote. Literally you would have thought that I was writing my first novel. And so they called the winner. On top of that, I kept telling people that I was going to win. So I was like, you better be nice to me this week because I'm going to win this competition and you're going to want to go out to eat with me, So I was really excited about this. And so they announced the winner on the speaker. And I remember just being stuck and still and happy. But then they announced the runner-up. I remember getting this feeling as to, well, that's weird. And so then they called the both of us to the office. And so we both go to the office and, I'm so excited because I'm thinking I'm going to tell which friend I'm choosing to go with me. And they say that they feel like it's only fair if instead of taking a friend, I would take the runner-up. And so I'm like, what? Even though, I was a bit hurt by it, I still was very proud of my accomplishment. And so I go home and I tell my mom, because she knows that I've been, kind of working on this. I tell my mom about it. And she's like, okay, so who are you choosing? So I tell her who I'm choosing. And she's like, well, who's that? And I was like, oh, well, he was the runner-up and blah, 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 blah. And she said, well, that was nice of you to choose him. And I was like, well, they said that I have to do that. And I was totally okay with it. And so my mom goes up to the school because she's seeing it from a different lens than I'm seeing it. I'm a child.
Right.
So she goes up to the school and she's talking to them at the school. And of course, nothing changes. And she gives me this pep talk in the car, like, I just want you to know that you won. I want you to know you did great, blah, 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 blah. This isn't fair. It's not clicking to me why it's not fair. And I'm going to be honest with you, Dr. Hilton, had it stopped there, it probably would not click with me for years. But about a week later, we had a field trip. And so when we go on this field trip, the person who is coming with me to the state competition has on a Confederate shirt, a Confederate belt, and all of those signs I know and I recognize immediately, right? And so I'm seeing them and I'm like, oh my gosh, okay. So now I'm seeing it through my mom's lens. Now I'm like kind of replaying it in my head. And in that moment, my spirit was so broken, but it didn't stop there. So he comes over to the table that me and my friends are sitting at, and he proceeds to tell me that there's no way that they were going to let a nigger outwin me.
Oh, my.
And he burst out laughing. And so him and his friends are laughing. The people at my table are just quiet. You know, there were some guys at my table that were friends with him, and so they're just kind of doing this nervous laugh. And I just remember crying and crying and crying. And so my grandfather was a military man, so he always taught us to kind of hold our emotions. And so I felt very vulnerable for crying in that way. And I felt very unprotected for the people that were around me. And so I told the teacher, and so the teacher said, well, I think he was just playing. Let's get him to apologize. So he laughs and says that he's sorry. And I still have to share one of the happiest moments, or what should have been the happiest moment in elementary school with him. But it just burned into me that you can do better, but it's still going to not necessarily be a fair fight.
Yeah.
So that was my first experience. But after that experience, I remember, number one, not wanting to tell my mother, because I said, even at a young age, I was very in tune to her emotions. And what I didn't want her to do was kind of re-experience some of the things that she experienced. And I knew that had I told her that, she would have been to the school. It would have been huge. So I'm like, nope. And I was sure to make sure that when I went and won the state championship, that I did it with pride. I did it with, class. I did it with a regalness. But at the end of the day, I told myself that this is the last time that I'm going to allow anyone to make me feel that way. And so even throughout the years, although I've experienced some overt and covert racism, I've always been able to hold my head high in the things that my mom taught me before the world started to attempt to break me. But I remember another incident where, we were teenagers and we would go to the mall, and what we would do is go to the mall, we sit at the food court, order some food, and we just talk. And so, of course, as we got older, we would do that, and guys would come, and, girls would come from other schools, and everybody would just talk. And there was this day that we were at the mall, and the police came up to us, and they told us that we had finished eating our food, and we needed to leave. And so I was very quiet. Everybody else, was getting up and scurrying because their tone was very angry and direct. And so I was very quiet as I scanned the entire food court and saw all of these groups of kids. And so my response was very calm. Well, we'll leave when you ask everybody else to leave, because nobody else is eating. So why should we have to leave if they don't? And so then he gets upset because he perceives this as a challenge, and he tells me that if I don't get up right now, that he's going to arrest me. So, of course, all of my friends are kind of running off, especially at the word arrest. And I was like, well, if you arrest me, then there's going to be a lot of other kids that you're going to have to arrest, because nobody else is doing what you're asking us to do. And so they end up taking us, well, not us, but they end up taking me because I'm the only one talking. down to this little precinct within the mall, trying to figure out what they were going to do with me. And I'm pretty sure they were trying to figure out what they were going to charge me with or not charge me with. But this calmness and stillness was over me the entire time because
Wow.
I knew that what I was doing was right. And I knew that even if my mother and dad had to come pick me up from a jail, that they were going to pick me up knowing that what I did was
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Inevitably, they didn't arrest me. They told me that I would be banned from the mall for life. Of course, that didn't necessarily happen either. But I just remember those moments. And I remember going out and talking to my friends and them being upset, like, well, why didn't you just get up? And I was like, but it's not right, because it's not right. And so I just remember those things and how those things stuck out in my brain and kind of began to write a story of, number one, how to handle it, how to find the peace within it, and how to still make sure that you keep your worth. Because if you are not feeling with things prior to the time that these things begin to hit, you will run, you will scurry, you will be afraid. But because my mom had fueled me to know that you're no different, I was able to sit in those situations and still continue to hold on to my sense of self-worth, if that makes sense.
It sure does make sense. Isn't it so powerful, one, to have good education? You learn to really use your mind, your thinking, and also to have a solid home. Those two things brought such an intrinsic self-worth inside of you that when it came externally, it could not control you.
They did. They did. They did. And I'm still very multicultural. Like, I'm still one of those people. I do not hold, I don't hold on to the hate. I hate the miseducation part of it, but I don't hold on to the hate, and I'm still able to be around anyways. I'm not holding that because I understand that it's systematic.
Well, and you're not judging the majority by the minority. Let me ask you a question. Did some of your personal experiences lead you into the field of therapy?
So that's a really good question. When I went to college, I went as a history major, and my only goals in life was to either be a curator at a museum or a history professor. And so I got out, and of course the easiest thing to do was to begin to work within the school system. And so I began to work within the school system, and as I began to work within the school system, I realized that there was a huge void in being able to teach these kids because there were so many different emotional deficits. I had this one little girl who every Monday morning, she would fight and fight and fight at breakfast. And so she had a good bond with me. And so with her doing that, they were like, Rhonda, is there any way that you can go and talk to her? And so finally, this is after this has been a pattern over and over and over again. I talked to her and I realized that she wouldn't eat from Friday until they came back to school on Monday.
Oh my goodness.
So if she gets into that cafeteria and she tries to fight everybody, they go back to their classes and they do what? They leave their breakfast for her to eat. And so seeing things like that and also seeing how the school system was dealing with those things really pushed me away from education. And so once it pushed me away from education, I went into corporate America. Realized that job in the school system was just planting seeds because once I was in corporate America, my brother went to Africa and he began to do case studies with children that had went through the most horrific things.
Yeah.
And in doing that, he was like, Rhonda, I really need you to come here and kind of help me do these case studies. And I'm like, I've never done a case study. And so he's like, but I need you. Okay. And so I pack up and I go, and I'm very much a researcher. So I'm researching how to do these things. And I get there and I start seeing children that have been through the most horrific trauma one can imagine, explaining that with a smile. And so as they were doing that, something began to pull on my heart that no. Corporate America doesn't need you. The
Mm,
school system needs you, but not in the way that you thought it needed you. You have
mm.
to find a way to heal these people. You have to find a way to heal these children. You have to find a way to make sure that they don't think that they have to live like this, to make sure they don't normalize this, to say that I have to say this with a smile because an adult did this to me. And so when I came back, I went back into school so that I could get licensed to become a therapist.
Oh, Rhonda, I love you. You're amazing. I mean,
Thank you.
truly, I don't have the skills that you have, but boy, we carry such a kindred heart to see healing
Mm-hmm.
come to those who've experienced such trauma and devaluation and the things those children experience. And I believe that was really like a whole sex trafficking type thing.
Yes.
And talk about dehumanization and how that affects a person's thoughts and ways and beliefs about themselves. How can you help a world begin to see through a lens of hope, even in the midst of all the injustices?
Oh, how I wish I had the answer to that question. I think it's going to take education. I think it's going to take a lot of deprogramming. I think it's going to take a lot of therapy. I have, and I know that I've told a lot of stories, but I think this one is particularly important. Have someone that I know that is a female Black police officer, and I spoke with her about everything that was kind of happening in society. And I'm going to tell you, had you asked me this question before speaking with her, I would have had a very concrete answer that would have been wrong. Um,
Mm,
but I spoke with her concerning the things that was happening in society, and she was very nonchalant about it. But because I knew her, and because I work with trauma, I realized that her being nonchalant was a trauma block. And
oh,
so I was like, okay, how am I going to deal with this? And do I want to really deal with this? And so, nevertheless, long story less long, I began to work with her on unblocking the trauma block. And so, as we're working and I'm asking her these questions, Dr. Hilton, she begins to wail this
yeah.
scream. And then she says, I don't think that I'm sensitive to the murder of George Floyd because I've killed so many of them. And so
Mm,
now I'm in the room like, wait a minute, I didn't know she was a murderer. What is happening? And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, keep going. And so she begins to tell me about how through basic training, they go and they have to, shoot these different targets. And these targets look like criminals. And, how difficult it is to get through basic training, to perfect your shots, to get these things right, and how you become so hyper focused on making those shots that you don't even look at the images. And so as we were peeling back that trauma, she realized that in basic training, because she had shot people that had looked like that, it desensitized her to understanding the reality of what was happening.
mm,
And so if that's not programming, I don't know what it is. And that's not to say, and I don't want anybody to take this out of context and say that the only people that are being shot in basic training, that are being images in basic training are Black people. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is that if you graduate by having to make a kill that looks this way, oftentimes when you see that on the street committing a crime, you're automatically programmed to do what you've been programmed to do: shoot. And so it's hard to really answer that question because the programming of it goes so deep. The lack of knowledge, the fear, the bias, all of those things run so deep. But I know this, and this is about all I know. I know that those things are healed through love. I
mm-hmm.
know that those things are healed through education. I know that those things are healed through inclusion. I know that those things are healed through conversations like this.
Yes.
And I know that it's going to take a lot of work. But if we're willing to put in the work as a country, and it can't just be one sect and one sect and one sect and one sect, as a country,
Yes.
if we're willing to put in that work and
Yes.
see that there is one race and it's the human race,
Yes.
and that race is under God, if we're able to see those things,
Yes.
then we're able to make some substantial changes.
I think you gave a very beautiful solution, because every one of our experiences that we've had, anything we've been taught, any programming just from the opinions of man can just shape us, desensitize us, and
Yes.
so we have to tear down those things to begin to look at life and humanity through a different lens. We need to get rid of the external indicators of who we think someone is to begin to, I love the word inclusion, because inclusion isn't just diversity, getting differences together. Inclusion is opening up our heart and letting people in, hearing their story and celebrating their lives and being willing to be a solution in their life. And these discussions are so important, because just by having them and someone listening to this discussion is already a voice of healing, because we're having it. I'm a baby boomer.
Right.
You're much younger than me. I'm white. You're black. And so there's lots of differences, but they're all really external. You don't have
They are.
wrinkles, I have them. And so, we can talk about a lot of those things, but we're human beings, and we value and celebrate one another and have relationship with one another. And there is true heart inclusion that heals. And we need more people walking with an inclusive heart and authentic love and authentic validation. The more we have that really genuinely value all of humanity, the more we're going to see healing come. Because devaluation is going to be unacceptable in our culture. It has to be.
I agree. And when we say inclusion, I mean real inclusion.
Exactly.
I mean the inclusion to know that you may have had an experience as someone from another race that may have made you, and I'm not saying that you have, but that may have made you have a bias. But if we can all sit down and talk about those things, if we can look at the root of those things, if we can really get to, I mean, it's almost like we're in this weeded garden because nobody wants to get to the root. And so until we get to the root of those things, we're going to continue to have these weeds growing in this garden called America and thinking that we can see through them, and we can't.
I know you work with individuals around transgenerational trauma. And so could you explain what that is and steps for healing?
Sure. So transgenerational trauma is trauma that has been passed throughout generations. And so it's somewhat like the idea that not only can someone experience trauma, they can also pass the symptoms and the behaviors of the trauma survival onto their children.
Yeah.
And so a good example of this would be when we moved into our neighborhood that we live in. My dad actually built the home there. And with him building the home there, before that, all of that road was trees, right? And so there was a point in time where initially when we were living there, we would always have to watch out for deer because they were so used to everything being their home that they would just run out into the street because it used to not be a street. It used to actually be the forest. They just were programmed to do that. And so we had to be very, very careful when it came to that. Now, as we've grown up, we've seen that even baby deer, like as a baby, will stop at the side of the road. It's almost as if they instinctively know to stop, although they haven't necessarily been taught. And that's transgenerational trauma. And some people refer to it as cellular memory, where your body is remembering something that you didn't necessarily experience, but because your forefathers experienced it or because your grandmother experienced it, it was passed through you through childbirth as a method of protection to protect you from having to experience that. And so that is, in a nutshell, what transgenerational trauma is. But I think one of the things that people often misconstrue is what is post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I want to kind of touch on that for a second. Post-traumatic stress disorder, is when you have been faced with some trauma. Either you directly experienced the trauma, you've witnessed it, you've learned that a traumatic event has happened to a close member or a close friend, or you've experienced, get this, experienced repeated or extreme exposure to the details of traumatic events, right? So if we just go with those definitions alone, and we talk about that in this context, there was a day that I was on Facebook and I was scrolling down, and Facebook had just initiated these sensitivity blocks where you have to click on this video because this video may be, a bit too sensitive for you. And so I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? So I clicked on the video and I saw this man horrifically beating and kicking on this dog, and it just made my skin curl. And I was like, oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm not clicking on any more of those. Within the next 5 minutes, I scroll down and I see a black man running. And as he's running, I see him get shot. There was no sensitivity cover. There was no blocking on it. That is post-traumatic stress disorder. That is experiencing repeated and extreme exposures to details of traumatic events. So running is transgenerational trauma. In my body, I am running because, number one, I'm afraid. I don't even know why I'm so afraid. Even if I have my license, even if I have everything that I have on me, there's something in my body that's telling me that this situation isn't good and I need to leave it. That's transgenerational trauma. Us repeatedly being exposed to it is strategic, but it's also post-traumatic stress that's affecting a community of people over and over and over again.
What can someone do to be healed?
So one of the things that they can do, I work with people that have known trauma quite a bit. And so the people that have known trauma, first off, it all goes back to getting back to the root of that trauma, right? And so if you come into my office and you're able to tell me, hey, Rhonda, I experienced a rape, I experienced getting beat up, then there are things that I can do. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do what we call psychoeducation. And psychoeducation is explaining to you exactly what trauma is, what it looks like, how it manifests, where it hides, all of those things. And a lot of times, just through those beginning sessions, when I'm telling them about the psychoeducation, they begin to relax. Because they begin to say, oh my gosh, I thought I was crazy. Oh my gosh, I didn't know that I was doing this as a reaction to that. And so then after that, what I do is relaxation techniques. And relaxation techniques are to help you when those triggers come to ground yourself in this moment, right? Because when trauma triggers come, what it's doing is it's taking you back to that moment, right? If you're jumping because somebody is close to you because you've been attacked before, you're going back to that moment. Right. I want you to sit in this moment. And so I teach them relaxation techniques because I know that we're getting ready to dig deeper into the trauma. And so after I teach them relaxation techniques, I teach them what they call affective modulation, which is pretty much emotional regulation techniques, how to regulate your emotions, how to work with your emotions, how to be able to be still in what you feel. Because a lot of people think that anger is a primary emotion, and it's not at all. It's not a primary emotion. It's based off of a lot of different underlying emotions. You're angry because you're sad. You're angry because you're frustrated. You're angry because you felt like a victim. So there's a lot of things that are manifesting into that. But if I can't tell you this before I start dealing with your trauma, then you're going to block me when I come to deal with your trauma.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And so after that, I go into what we call cognitive coping. And cognitive coping is we're getting ready to learn different coping mechanisms that work for you and how you can use them in your everyday life to kind of cope with what you've been through. And I'm doing all of this before I'm addressing the trauma, right? Because once we address that trauma, I want you to be able to have the education that I gave. I want you to be able to have the education that I gave. I want you to be able to learn how to relax yourself and ground yourself in this moment. I want you to be able to regulate your emotions, and I want you to be able to cope. But what we're not going to do is not call a thing a thing. We're going to go through this. We're going to call it what it is. because only if you process through it will you heal from it. And I think that there's a natural instinct in us to cover. It's not happening. It hasn't happened. I don't want to go back there. But when you cover, what it actually does to your brain is it leaves parts that are untapped by you. So you may have covered so much trauma, meaning in your brain, you're not going to deal with all of this trauma. But then under that part that you're covering, there's empathy. Under that part that you're covering, there's emotion. Yeah. Under that part that you're covering, there's vulnerabilities. But you can't tap into that in your brain because you spent so much time covering that. And so my job is to get you up to the place where we can process through, we can call a thing, and we can begin to heal from that thing.
That is so powerful. You are taking someone who has been legitimately victimized, and you are taking away the label that they are a victim. You are giving them personal power to overcome what rendered them previously powerless on the inside of them.
Absolutely. And I always tell my clients, what you say after I am is powerful.
That's so good. Yes.
You have to be able to monitor what you say after I am. And so I do this exercise. It's a mirroring exercise where I will sit them in front of a mirror and I will ask them what they see. And so they'll tell me what they see, and then I'll ask them what they want to see. And they tell me what they want to see, and then I have them to begin to tell them themselves while looking at themselves in the mirror who they are. One of the deepest things about my job is that 90% of the beginning of me working with clients is breaking apart everything that people have written upon other people. What your mom said you would never be. What your dad said you would never do. What that relationship broke you from. 90% of that, those first session, is breaking all of that down. Because what people do is they allow that to be their identity. They allow that to be who they see in the mirror. They allow that to be who they think they are. But once you start peeling back some of those layers and they start seeing, oh no, I am beautiful.
Yes.
Oh no, I am successful. Oh no, I am smart.
Yeah.
Then once I can get you to see you, then we can get you where you need to be. And
that
so
awesome.
A lot of the first part is me trying to get them to see who they are. And a lot of that is through I am statements.
Yes.
So what I don't allow people to do, it's really funny because although I'm a therapist, I'm very much a laid back person. And I know it doesn't seem like it because I'm talking a lot, but I really am not a big talker. But it's really funny because my clients will come into my office and they'll say, I'm stupid. And I'll say, stop cursing at me. They'll be like, I didn't curse. I didn't curse. Every time you say something against yourself, you're cursing.
Yeah. There you go.
And so I tell them that all the time. And then if their mom shows up, meaning they say something that their mom told them they would or would not be, I say, oh, wait, I didn't know that your mom was coming today. I thought we were dealing with you. And so I try to make it as practical and as therapeutic as I possibly can, but I want them to really, really be able to see themselves, because until you see yourself for who you are, you will always walk under this scale and this veil of what people told you that you are or will not be.
Boy, I wish I would have had you 25 years ago, but you were just a little kid, because I was molested from the time I was 2 years old to 9 years old. But my journey, and even though I didn't have anyone to help me like you, the whole journey went from, no, I am not a victim. I am powerful, and I began to change the way I viewed myself. When you said the I am statements, that is so true, because who I believe I am dictates my personal reality, and
Absolutely.
I become what I believe about myself. And I personally believe every human being, no matter what has happened to them, they are truly powerful. I came to understand years ago that powerful people change what they can, but they choose peace in what they cannot change. And one thing I cannot change is my past. I cannot change somebody else's attitude, but I can change me. How can
Yes.
each of us use our personal power to make decisions to become the best version of ourselves?
I think that we all need to take a time out. I think we all need to take some moments where we just breathe. I think that the current culture of society, we often forget to breathe a lot. Even though we're breathing and we're still here, nobody's stopped breathing, but we don't really take the time to inhale and exhale out. Inhale the good in and exhale out the bad.
Yes.
And I think that's the start, just breathing, just sitting with yourself and having some quiet time. And then the second thing I think is challenging yourself in the mirror, challenging those self-defeating thoughts that you have, challenging the self-defeating beliefs that you have, challenging the trauma. And when I say challenging the trauma, I mean challenging it with a solution base.
Yes.
And I think that once we begin to do that, we'll begin to get power over who we are and how we react, right? Because what we can't do is immediately change the actions of others. We can only change our actions, our reactions,
yes,
and how we're allowing things to affect us. And so I think once we begin to do that, it gives us such a personal power that we begin to strategize better. Because if I can take down everything that's been programmed into me to think, everything that's been said that I am, and I can see who I really am, then I can see what the vision is for my life. And the vision may necessarily be doing A, but it may be doing B or C, or it may be strategically finding a way to change policy. It may be some of these different things, but it does not start and it never happens until you're able to look within yourself. And the reason that I say breathe first before you do it is because once you start looking in you, you start to see parts of you that have just went
yes,
almost unnourished. And you start to see those parts, and then you start to see parts of power within yourself, power in you that hasn't been used. And so if you don't breathe first, you may react out of emotion. You may get in that mirror and get emotional. No, you have to calm yourself. You have to still yourself. And so those two things on a marketplace level, on a spiritual level, we have to pray. And when I say pray, I mean we have to collectively come together and we have to pray for healing, because some of this stuff is just bigger than us.
Yeah.
It's bigger than us, and it's going to take praying, and it's going to take coming together, and it's going to take healing for anything to get accomplished.
So true. Rhonda, you have been such a blessing, such a stable, healing voice today. And I know that everyone listening to this, I mean, you just gave the world a free therapy session. You gave us so many tools that we can begin to apply to our life like right now, so that we can become not just a better version of ourselves, but we can walk with a personal power where we are not controlled by the opinions of men. We are not controlled even by the things that are taking place in our nation. And so that we can powerfully rise up and say, one thing I can do is I can be a voice of healing. One thing I can do is reach out and love all humanity. One thing I can do is be the opposite of what I see taking place in the world that is wrong. And instantly that person becomes a part of the solution. And that is what you've given us today, Rhonda. Thank you so much. I love you from the bottom of my heart.
Welcome.
And partnering with you has been so beautiful.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. I love you too, and I'm so honored to be a part of this.
I want to thank you for listening and encourage you to become a part of the StopDevaluation movement. Be sure to like and follow #StopDevaluation on social media, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and visit StopDevaluation.com for more information and free resources. You can help spread the movement by sharing with others, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, and most of all, by living a courageous lifestyle of using your power for good. Go out and value someone today. Your life matters, and you can make the world a better place. One word, one choice, one action of validation at a time.